all know, the protesters on Euromaidan, and I'll do background in about a minute worth of background. On the 21st of November, the protesters, on the decision, the legal decision of the cabinet to suspend the negotiations with the European Union to sign the association agreement, about 10 people went not to Maidan but to European Square in Kiev, led by Mustafa, what's his name, from Ukrainska Pravda, and about 10 people. And that was the core of what's grown to be known as Euromaidan here across the world. In fact, it was added to Ukrainian dictionaries this year. The situation had grown considerably until the point where there was the first attempt to forcefully remove the protesters on the night from the 29th to 30th of November, which resulted in numerous arrests, numerous beatings, people being injured in a bloody way. A second attempt in the second week of December to do the same thing, the beating of journalists over on Christmas Day, on the Latin Christmas, followed by further attacks on the civil liberties of people, including Yuri Lutsenko over the weekend, including the intimidation that was attempted against the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. On the 13th, a letter was sent from the Ministry of Culture to the primate of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Sviatoslav, Archbishop of Halich and Kiev, that threatened to do two things. To one, remove the ability of the Catholic Church to minister to Ukrainians due to their deemed illegal proselytizing, their illegal religious activities at the Maidan and at political events. And then when we thought things couldn't get worse, today the budget, the state budget for 2014 was approved by the Verkhovna Rada. Included in that budget are provisions of the December 17th agreement between President Viktor Yanukovych and President Vladimir Putin, and some of the details of which can be obtained on the government of Russia's website, but not available to from the Ukrainian government, include provisions to not only possibly rearm the Black Sea Fleet in contravention of the agreements and assurances that were given to Ukraine in 1994, I believe. I think it was 1994. All this to say, there were also measures to have the Ukrainian government allow the FSB, the Russian equivalent of the SBU, the secret police, the internal police, to police on the territory of Ukraine. There were also provisions that would allow for joint ventures in strategic areas of Ukraine's economy, including aeronautics, the Antonov aircraft, agriculture, transportation, and infrastructure. There were also other measures which probably the most repulsive to me personally was the cultural initiative where Vladimir Putin and President Yanukovych jointly agreed to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the birth of Taras Shevchenko, that great Ukrainian and Russian poet. So, I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's sickening, actually. that someone who fought for freedom for all of his life, fought for the Ukrainian people, would be bartered away in an agreement to be signed with Vladimir Putin. So if we fast forward then to today, so those provisions, the most of the West has been focusing on $2.68 per cubic meter of natural gas that Russia will be selling. It's a 1/3 reduction in the price of natural gas, of sale of gas from Russia to Ukraine, and the purchase by Russia of $15 billion worth of Ukraine's Euro bonds. So that was also in the budget that was included today. I should note that in the original agreement, in the Kharkiv agreement that was signed by Putin and Yanukovych in 2010, in exchange for a 25-year renewal of the Black Sea Fleet lease, the Ukrainian side was to receive natural gas price between $2.40 and $2.60 per cubic meter. So therefore, in fact, they're paying now more than what they had agreed to in exchange for the extension of the Black Sea Fleet 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And we know that the Russian side didn't live up to their commitments that they had made in the original Kharkiv agreement. But that's not the worst news that we have from today. The worst news that we have from today is what the opposition has called a parliamentary coup d'etat, which took place in the Verkhovna Rada. What happened? MPs were locked out of the chamber. The chamber, which one of the concessions that was made at the beginning of the session was that MPs had to vote personally with their MP cards. No more of this piano playing that you may have seen, where one MP will vote for 5 people. Well, today the opposition MPs were locked out. The government MPs were in the chamber, and they approved not only the budget legislation, but 10 pieces of legislation. And they approved the 10 pieces of legislation by a show of hands. And in some cases, on one of the most outrageous bills, the bill that was put forward by Olinik, and I want to name them because, frankly, they deserve to be named and shamed, and Kolesnichenko. The legislation was adopted when it was called. People were asked who's in favor. And people put their hands up, and 3 seconds later they said 235 za, 235 for, 1 against, 1 abstention, and that was it. And that was the beginning and continuation of the trampling of the rights of the Ukrainian people. What are some of the main facts? What's included in this legislation? Well, you cannot hold public displays of any actions against the government. You cannot drive your car in groups of 4 or more, or 5. And the penalties are quite severe. For gathering and disseminating information about the Berkut or their families, you can get 2 years in jail. For blocking access to residential buildings, so as a result of people protesting in front of Interior Minister Zakharchenko's house, you can now get 6 years in jail. MPs may be stripped of their parliamentary immunity in jail by simple majority vote of the Verkhovna Rada. All members of the Berkut police force who were involved in the beatings of November 30th as well as December 1st have been granted immunity from prosecution for beating peaceful protesters. Libel by the press can result in 2 years in jail. It's been added to as a criminal code offense. Unauthorized installation of tents, stages, or sound equipment will land you 15 days in jail. And 10 days arrest for participation in peaceful gatherings wearing a helmet, mask, or covering one's face. And lastly, the legislation for non-profit corporations, for charities, for civil society groups was changed so that any organization that receives any money from a country other than Ukraine is required to, loses its non-profit status, is required to pay taxes. In addition to that, they're also required to report quarterly on their activities publicly. So it's a real drain on them, and they are called foreign agents, and they will therefore be forbidden, we believe, from acting in areas such as election observation. Is what we've surmised. So, all in all, there are probably a dozen or 2 dozen more terrible specific elements which have been criminalized. Frankly, it's making Ukraine into a police state. The law was adopted without following the rules of the Verkhovna Rada. The law was adopted without any study. The law was actually presented as a законопроект on the 14th. There was no legislative committee study. There was no study by members of the Verkhovna Rada. There was absolutely no scrutiny whatsoever. And in fact, many MPs were quoted shortly after the vote as saying that they didn't know what they were voting for in the bills after the budget was passed. And as it was done by a show of hands, there's no accountability of who voted for what. One of the areas that I haven't touched upon is where we as a Hamada can make a difference. Canada has been at the forefront. We've been recognized on the Maidan on numerous occasions, and there are initiatives that have been done which are good expressions of moral support for the people who for 2 months now have been day in and day out protesting in the bitter cold on the Maidan. But we need to do more than that. Some of the, there have been somewhere between 60 and 70 protests across Canada, a number of which have been videotaped and actually shown on Maidan. People have dance groups, song groups, choirs have undertaken initiatives that have been sent to support the Maidan. Those are good moral support. There have been Vyshivki Viktorov across the world actually, and the head of the UCC Arts Council put out another video today with people from around the world wearing their Vyshivki in support of the Maidan. The important things that we can do are keeping this issue in the media. We need to have the Canadian media and the international media paying attention. Yesterday, as a result of the grievous, the grievous threat made by the state against the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, I was calling around Canadian television stations offering up what I thought was a pretty good speaker for them to have, Bishop Boris Gudziak, live on TV for them, out of either from their Paris studios or via satellite. We were making him available, and all of the Canadian media outlets that I contacted took a pass. they didn't think that it was important enough, I guess. But you know, we were undeterred. We got him some smaller interviews. We also wrote to and I spoke with Andrew Bennett, Canada's ambassador of religious freedom. Spoke with his office. He was in Israel yesterday, and we're also writing to the Council of Canadian Council of Bishops and the Council of Catholic Bishops to get the wider Canadian society to express their opposition to this repression of religious freedom in Ukraine. I think Patriarch Sviatoslav said it well yesterday when he said that мы пережили Сталина, мы пережили Brezhnev, we wouldn't пережити Yanukovych. But I think when we're called upon, we can't sit on our hands. We need to raise people's awareness. The people in this room are the active members of the Hromada, of the Ukrainian community here in Ottawa. And it's up to us to write letters to the Citizen, to online papers, to The Sun, to iPolitics, to whatever it may be, to put things onto the internet, on our Facebook sites, to share them with friends, because even Ukrainians, the census reports that there are 1,250,000 people who self-identify as Ukrainian Canadians here in Canada, and I would bet good money that over 1 million of them aren't aware of the repression of religious freedom and of the other political repressions that I talked about that happened in Ukraine this week. And we've got to do a better job of making them understand that. And we do what we can. We had a good run of media interest when the Maidan, when the Lenin statues were being toppled, and there were hundreds of thousands of people there. But we've got to try to maintain that interest. And what we found was the local protests were very good at getting into the local media markets. Here, Anna did a fantastic job, as did Natalia and others, of getting coverage of the work that the Hromada was doing here to get the story out. But we need to make sure that that's constant, that we're constantly doing that we're meeting with. Right now, the MPs are at home. They're not in the House of Commons. They finished on the 10th of December after they did a 4-hour emergency debate on Ukraine. And just a quick aside, we found out that the debate was happening at 10 o'clock that morning. Wrote a 15-page briefing note, got copies made and delivered to every MP in the House of Commons. And guess what? They didn't have any other materials for the debate, so they were reading our briefing note as their own speeches. The NDP's Paul Doer, who was criticized a week earlier for publicly having questioned why John Baird went on to the Maidan, was reading our briefing note and said that that's a plan of action that the government should follow for Ukraine. So we've got to be in their face. So I'm asking people, there are draft letters to write to your members of parliament. You don't have to write what Coop says. You have your own minds. You may, inform them of what's going on, that it's an important issue. There's a rule of thumb in an MP's office. If they get a call, that means that there's about 10 people in their constituency that are interested in an issue. If they get an email, it's about the same. If they get an actual hard copy original letter, that's 50. If you actually want to meet with them, they assume that represents the views of 100 people. So, if we can get people, there are 10, 12 members of parliament in the Ottawa region, if you look at both sides of the river and the greater area. I ask you, whatever time you can spare, if you can write an email to your MP, send them a letter, call their office, ask for a meeting, it all helps. That's one of the things that they'll have to learn in Ukraine at some point, is that there is a sense of responsibility, and that the MPs here, as anyone who's worked, and I see Anna, who's a CUP intern, knows that the MPs feel very much that it's their responsibility to be responsive to the views of their constituents, especially on an issue like this. But in addition to that, if you have, we have petitions that you can download from our website. What we're asking for, it's very simple, is the people who have committed human rights violations in Ukraine against the peaceful protesters, that personal sanctions be taken against them. What more can we do? We had a parliamentary hearing here in December. The Americans had one in their Senate yesterday. The American Senate was quite, the State Department was quite soft on the issues. But as a result today, bipartisan support emerged from Senator McCain and a Democratic senator from Connecticut. I'm sorry, his name escapes me. But they also put into place companion legislation for the Magnitsky Act that would prevent the travel and the possible freezing of assets of people involved globally. It's called the Global Human Rights Accountability Act. So people who perpetrate. Is it Menendez? No, he's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. It was, and he's from New Jersey. But there was a, I'm sorry, I don't remember. In any event, and we made sure to send copies of that legislation to all of the political parties here today as well, so that they know that talking about sanctions won't cut it anymore. When you've taken away people's right to free speech, when you've taken away their ability to assemble peacefully, and when you've taken away their right to express their religious views, enough is enough. And so we're trying to make a point to them that the time for talk has passed, and the time is now for them to act. So any of you who have the opportunity to impress those points upon your local political leaders at the less so at the municipal level, but even at the provincial and the federal level, it would be greatly, greatly appreciated. Because, look, two things happen. Either this legislation goes forward and Ukraine, sadly, will become much more like Russia and Belarus, or we can push back and we can try to staunch the repression and then see how far we can get. The last area, of course, is the legislation passed today will have a serious chill effect on charitable support for people who have been on the streets.
And just to add,
in Canada?
yes, and to add the other conditions, that we've heard more about the demands that the visa-free regime for U.S., Canadian, and EU citizens is going to be cut off. That's on the table.
So two issues. So the first one, Canada held hearings in 2012. Shortly, you may remember in March of 2012, we had a two-day conference here called Ukraine at the Crossroads. And at the time of that conference, there were 2 days of hearings by Canada's subcommittee of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Committee on International Human Rights. So that committee met with a number of the speakers we brought in for the conference, and that committee made some very valid recommendations on some of the abuses that had been taking place in Ukraine to that point. That committee then went and visited Kharkiv, Kyiv, and Lviv, and met with civil society groups and around not only the Tymoshenko issue, but on a number of issues of media repression, of pressure towards civil society groups, including human rights groups, which unfortunately in Ukraine are still reliant on the government for their budgets very often, and so that tends to cause them to hold their tongue when they do see abuses. The committee did excellent work, I would say, and I think that it's an excellent suggestion to actually, when Parliament reconvenes, to have them use as the starting point their last report and the government's response to it, and then just to do maybe perhaps a one-day hearing to look at what's happened in the interim period. I think it's an excellent suggestion, you know, that we.
This man.
On visas, visas have typically been an issue that they've been using to try to say, you know, you guys are always coming down hard on us, but you know, we have lower acceptance rates from Canada and from the EU than you have for other countries. I think if done in concert with other travel restrictions for people who perpetrated human rights abuses, I think a much more liberalized visa regime for Ukrainians, to have more Ukrainians travel to Europe, to travel to Canada, is desirable. 90% of people from central and eastern Ukraine, according to a poll last year, had not traveled west abroad. A lot of them have been to Russia or to Turkey. But they had not been to Western Europe, they had not been to North America. And that was a Zalusky poll last year. So I think that anything that can be done to increase the opportunities for two-way travel, for exchanges, and for visa-free travel is to be encouraged. So I think they're holding that out as a potential stick to try to get the visa-free regime. And the visa-free regime they use as a political tool to say, see, we're not so bad, they've lifted the visa restrictions on us. So you have to weigh the benefits for the government versus the benefits for the society.
So you don't take it seriously, this law that is proposed, that they're going to make all Canadians, Americans, and EU citizens require visas to travel to Ukraine?
It wasn't that long ago that we had to do it anyway. No, in 2005 for the Orange Revolution, we had, you know, I was photocopying everyone's birth certificates and passports and sending them for visa applications. You know, so it's not that long ago that they were required. I think they can be used politically, but I think that we need to use them back politically for a more liberalized regime, because I think it only benefits us. You know, and I think that's something where, don't like the government of the day, I think we should try to ease restrictions for normal Ukrainians.
Thank you. In addition to the what we could do as local people writing letters, I was just thinking at a broader national level. What plans have the Cook National Council put into place in order to influence the Canadian government? I mean, you've done a lot of good work in schmoozing with Baird and the Prime Minister to get you know, a favorable, how do you say, a hearing. Now, what sort of plans does the Cook National Council could do about that, given the repressive, you know, pseudo legislation, you know, enacted by those, you know, by that regime, to anticipate it? Because if trade embargo isn't going to work, I think you have to ratchet it up at that level. You know, the local stuff is fine, but I think the next step is now, and if you want to maintain visas and a free trade and a free exchange of people and ideas, which is imperative. We can't close our minds and our doors. You know, what can we do to influence the government in order for it to take a visible stand for us?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I think the first thing that we have to do, and we have started doing today already, is we've made forays to both the Prime Minister, to the White House through the UCPBA, as well as to our Prime Minister's office, asking them if the legislation has not been signed into law, to let them know that this is serious, that this is creating a police state, and that they should take that message to Mr. Yanukovych and urge him to not sign the legislation. If it's been signed, to make it abundantly clear that Canada will not sit by, that there will be repercussions for him, for his family, and for his friends and associates if the law is applied against peaceful protesters. And I think that the government of Canada and the government of the United States are prepared to make those messages, I hope. More specifically, if it goes forward, then I think that we don't have a lot of cards left, and I think that it has to be the implementation of the targeted sanctions and visa restrictions against the people who are involved in the.
I was thinking along those lines, given the South African apartheid movement, it was started by governments, and I think if the Canadian government can influence the G8 and the G20 group to do those things, be selective in their embargoes, and I think especially if they were to look at the crook oligarchs, if they start losing money, then they're going to make a shift in politics.
How can you target an embargo in a way that would hold your?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's.
I actually would like to draw the distinction, because that's an excellent point. We have never successfully implemented anywhere targeted sanctions. We're not talking about an embargo. We do not want Ukraine to be North Korea or Iran, where you draw a line around it, and the International Committee has a list of goods that cannot be shipped into that country. We don't want to end up there, because that will harm the Ukrainian people. That will stop the $26 billion that Ukrainians living and working abroad send home each year will not be able to make it into that country to help the people who need it most, while the oligarchs are sending $28 billion a year into offshore tax-free accounts, and who pays for it at the end of the day? It's the normal Ukrainians who pay their taxes.
Which is a different situation from South Africa or the other.
No, the reason that the parallel I'm drawing there was the ability of certain governments, the Western governments, to sponsor a concerted effort to blacklist South Africa. The same has to be done here, in the sense that there has to be some champions at the G8, G20, and at the United Nations to make people understand, okay? Because this issue is off the newspapers. You have to put it back into a different context, at a different level. I'm not suggesting a trade embargo. I'm just suggesting getting at the crooks, at the oligarchs.
So what we technically talk about when we talk about two things. We talk about visa restrictions. The difficulty that we have is Canada's legislation around visa restrictions is actually very helpful, because it contains provisions to ban from coming into Canada people who have violated human rights, who have obtained their money through illegal means. So on the travel restriction side, that is it's quite a solid legal framework that you've got going. The difficulty that we have is who are we targeting? We'll be targeting the Yanukovych government, so the Azarov and cabinet. You'd be targeting some of the, if you could make the case, some of the wealthier oligarchs and their families. The issue that we have is, since Yanukovych has come to office in 2010, we've had 2 ministers come to Canada. So there's not a lot of pressure that we can bring to bear there. Where there may be more, and Canada is a world expert, is something called FinTrack. The Department of Finance Canada, as a creation of the G20, created FinTrack. It was created to monitor international flows of money, largely for drug cartels and other money laundering and other ways of shifting assets between borders and among companies. Very successful and a world leader. That's an area where Canada can punch above its weight and can influence the Americans and the Europeans, because let's look at it this way. There's probably a lot of Ukrainian money hidden away in the States. I'm not so sure about Canada. I haven't seen very much evidence. I've seen one piece of evidence of any large sums of Ukrainian money that are here in Canada. So if we can lead the parade with the Europeans on the international freezing of assets, on the transfer of assets, and make it very uncomfortable, some of the pressure tactics that have been used, where there have been pickets in front of some of the cabinet ministers, the head of the Security and Defense Council, these people all have palatial residences that have been made through money that was stolen from the people of Ukraine across Western Europe, in Austria, in Switzerland, in London. It's actually quite sad. And one of the effective tactics that has been taken is actually leafleting their neighbors. having pickets out
In those countries.
in those countries.
We
So.
don't have all these laws.
Right, so you have a group of 10 people picketing in front of a Hyde Park address and putting leaflets about how, so they either, it's a name and shame campaign where you can out them to their neighbors and you can try to force them. And in fact, that's part of what I was trying to do with the article that I had written last week, was to try and see if people could be convinced or forced into dissociating themselves with the measures, the anti-democratic measures of the regime. I don't think that the opposition was, or the media, frankly, was all that interested in it. They everyone was looking at sanctions as the silver bullet, but at the part of it has to be accountability of the MPs for the decisions that they make there, for voting for the budget that sold out the interests of Ukraine to Putin. So I think that's it's unfortunately a sign of a not very mature democracy.
Don?
Well, I read an interesting article today, I think it was by Andreas Ullmann, and it was, I don't know if you read this one. Ukraine, it's not effective to try to corner Ukraine because Ukraine is already cornered. That it would be more effective to use European Union's leverage against Russia. That there's a lot more trade and Russian interest involved, and they can get Putin to back off, which would free up Ukraine a little. For example, Germany helped fund the undersea pipeline to supply gas to Germany, avoiding Ukraine. So in fact, it weakened any position they might have for a pro-European Ukraine. So maybe we should, I mean, in his sense, maybe we should be pushing Europe to do something towards Russia.
There are a number of countries in Europe who aren't Ukraine's friend. Germany and France are two of them. They have interests, and their interests are much more well tied to Russia than they are to Ukraine. And Merkel has sold out Ukraine in the past, as has her predecessor. So, I'm thinking specifically of NATO accession. So there's let's not kid ourselves. Russia is a big player in that part of the world, and some of the other countries will put their own interests ahead of Ukraine and human rights.
Actually, I wanted to ask a similar question to you, because the EU did cancel, I just read, they canceled their traditional dinner with Russians, which is a good sign. So it is a geopolitical war going on. Germany is not a member of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, only one of the few countries in the world who's not a member. So relying on Germany in regard to helping resolve money laundering assets, I really count on that. But what do you think? Do you think that the Ukrainian community in Canada should somehow point out more the role that Russia is playing, and put pressure, or ask the MPs also to put pressure on the Russian Federation, or not?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That's one that we made in our briefing note to the parliamentarians for the all-party debate, which is available on the website. But look, we can't be naive about this. Would we have been here if it weren't for the tremendous pressure that was brought to bear, the economic coercion, the extortion, the blackmail that was used against Ukraine's economic interests towards the end of summer and the early fall? I don't know. It was. It certainly was hardball, and the West wasn't at Ukraine's side. The Americans didn't tell Russia to take a hike when they were using that type of economic blackmail in September and October, and the EU certainly wasn't either. There may have been some finger waving, but there weren't any gestures towards Russia to combat their concrete blackmail. I mean, I don't know about polite words to use when you're shutting your border to dairy, to chocolate, to certain steel exports, and across the board, causing 10 to 20-hour delays at the border. I mean, that's I tried to explain this to people and say, Canada's just signed a trade agreement with Europe. It was happening at the same time. Can you imagine if the response of the Americans was to shut the border to Canadian exports in retaliation for Canada seeking to diversify its markets? It's nuts. It doesn't make any sense. And yet that was the ploy that was used. And people just aren't able to get their head around it. They don't understand frankly, it's a colonial an imperial tendency that Russia has had in their treatment of Ukraine for centuries.
Again,
And just a question, how do people in Ukraine interpret that? We, because of the way we've grown up and our expectations, we would be shocked at that and we would react. But do people in Ukraine just take that as it comes because they expect that, or are they gonna?
Depends where you are. Look, there are a number of people in Ukraine. Ukraine is by no means 100% behind EU accession. There are a number of people who are working in certain sectors of the economy, primarily to take the sort of Rust Belt from Zaporizhia up through Dnipropetrovsk, who are working in some of the manufacturing sectors where 90% of their exports go to Russia and they can't yet compete in an EU market. They worry. And they were the ones who were concerned that there wasn't enough in the EU deal for renewing their market. So the people in those areas, they were concerned, and I think they were the ones who felt it when Russia put the squeeze on.
If Russia does that, doesn't Russia violate certain rules of trade organizations it belongs to?
Yes. So Russia did violate the WTO, but they would also violate the terms of the agreement whereby Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons.
That's right.
Because there was not supposed to be any economic, political, or military coercion of Ukraine by Russia, and the Americans and the United Kingdom were supposed to be the defenders of Ukraine in implementing this agreement. So we see that they weren't there for Ukraine at the time.
So actually that was the question I was going to ask, that shouldn't we, as a Ukrainian diaspora here in Canada and the United States, push for the United States and the United Kingdom to actually, live up to their words and enforce their agreements and actually tell Russia to back off?
Yeah.
I mean, they made them honorary G8 member. It's kind of honorary, just made them. So is this, maybe they should?
Well, you've noticed that the language from Canada has been G7 plus Russia.
That's okay.
That'll kick them out. So you're right. Look, it's if that was the problem, that no one was willing to stand up for Ukraine. The Americans weren't, the Europeans weren't, the Brits weren't.
Well, I wonder if they ever had the intention to.
Just in terms of, you mentioned the press interest, and I'm sure that others have noticed this as well. The BBC has maintained a pretty decent level of coverage of the protests. And I understand they have a journalist, David Stern, who works out of Kyiv. I don't know if there are links between the various Ukrainian organizations with you, if that's maybe something that you can use as a platform in other pressing news if this is not carried on, at least to make it to the coverage, because it was very good. I thought it was very good.
And it's by far preferable to Associated Press uses a stringer based in Moscow, who almost every second one of their articles talks about Ukrainian far-right
Yes.
neo-fascist
Yes.
Nazis,
Yes.
and how that the Maidan is is being corrupted by these fascist slogans and such.
And David Stearns was much more balanced.
No, look, I think we've got an uphill battle on a number of fronts, and you know, the fight about the World War II and the Great Patriotic War and the tumbling of Lenin statues, which we're up to, I think, 30 now. Lenin statues.
Actually, just one other thing, along those lines, because of the best measures, are there any links with organizations that Reporters Without Borders, who are looking to define this to be very offensive as well?
Yeah, so they came out today, Reporters Without Borders put out a statement on the slander and libel part of the legislation, and the parts dealing with, actually another part, the transmission of messages that are extreme and contrary to the interests of the government. If you read the legislation, goes down to the level of internet service providers, can carry responsibility and can be fined, and it also transfers. So it's actually quite pervasive. It also transfers to printers who print material for anti-government type activities.
So Reporters Without Borders, they're involved too.
Another concern is following the fascist aspect, and that was another part of the law.
Which
And
one?
now fascism in Ukraine is also punishable for 10 years, I think it's 10 years. I'm not sure if it's in the police. I have a question for all of you. A member of the Canadian Ukrainian community informed me a few days ago that they saw on CBC a advertisement for Sochi. And in that advertisement for Sochi is a short clip of the Lenin statue falling down the peak. Has anybody else seen this? No? Please keep your, I don't watch television, but please keep your eyes open, and if you do see it, I think the CBC should really be approached. That is a little urgent.
The interesting thing about that was there was some discussion about boycotting, as a result of the events in Ukraine, and the decision that was taken was that it would do us a lot of harm on a PR level to penalize Canadian athletes, and that's why the recommendation was for a political boycott, and we saw that both the Prime Minister and the American administration are not sending politicians to Sochi, official sending athletes.
Right over here.
So,
Yep.
in view of the recent actions prevented in Ukraine, what do you think should be our long-term strategy for a secure future before the elections in 2015 in order for democratic powers to have any chance of winning? Because looking at the laws that they passed, they can actually turn off, the state can turn off internet in the entire country basically because they links, that's what it's doing. What do you think we can do? Because by the time 2015 rolls around, there may be no one who can take part in the elections. What can we do?
I think now the biggest mistake that we made by not reacting immediately to the unconstitutional forming of government in 2010 was not reacting loudly enough and soon enough. I think that the fuss needs to be made now in order to have as many of these laws stricken down by either not coming to force, not getting Yanukovych to sign them, getting them stricken by either Ukrainian courts, which is unlikely, or European courts, and they have to constantly be in the spotlight, and if they're continued, they need to be made a pariah of Ukraine for those purposes, because there isn't another way. If they're allowed to take hold and be enforced, then it will be very difficult. It will be fighting a rearguard battle to try to maintain anything, and to maintain international election observers, and able to provide an alternate viewpoint, to provide printed materials, internet, debate. It's you know, even look, there's been an outpouring of new media outlets. You've got Romanska TV, you've got Espresso, you have there's a new one that that came up. These are all good things, but I could easily see with this legislation, all of that being shut down and very quickly.
So, in the light of recent rules, anti-democratic rules adopted, what would be the probability of the Canadian government to take sanctions against individuals in the Ukrainian government?
You want a percentage or?
No, I'm just asking.
I think that I think that the government of Ukraine has shot itself in the foot today, and if if this goes ahead, Ukraine becomes Belarus, and then there has to be repercussions, and frankly, I think it's not a question of if but when, and then that there will be repercussions and sanctions. I just don't see another way, because Ukraine is too important. It's too important to Canada, and so I don't see that how it could not lead to that type of conclusion.
The government also said they'll be signing the association agreement this year, right? But these laws are not going to help.
Yeah. Well, for example, Canada would not sign a free trade agreement with a non-democratic country. I think that the EU has similar rules in place. The existence of these laws would take that possibility away. Also, the government has said that they would sign them this year. That was after, if you remember, on the 21st of November, they said that they wouldn't sign it until after the presidential elections. After they beat up the protesters on the 30th, and the international community was shining a spotlight on them, and of course said, well, maybe we'll sign them next year. After the next pressure was applied on the government, they were going to be talking about restarting early in January the hearings, and that they were going to be possibly signing something by March. Don't judge them. We all know we can't judge them by what they say. You judge them by their actions, and Russia, in the agreement with Russia, Russia actually has a say on whether they can sign an agreement that will have a negative economic impact on their bilateral trade.
Even Putin said after they signed the agreement with Singapore, he hopes that, I think it's also that he hopes that Ukraine will discuss the foreign policy versus Russia.
Well, look, Medvedev has said in the past that in any international fora where Ukraine can't make it, Russia is more than willing to represent Ukraine's interests at the table.
It's a problem.
through privatizations. The absolute corruption from the top to the bottom of the system is, I think that's absolutely true. And that, the Ukrainian government did pass 18 pieces of legislation to try to make themselves Europe ready. The Europeans had put on the table $26 billion, 19 billion euros in order for them to sign the agreement. So whether they would have tried to take the money and then sort of struggle through, don't know, it's impossible to know.
Are we all talked out? It's 10 after 9 now. I don't know. This is actually, I don't think we're really talked out. We can talk all night on this if we want, right? But I'd like to thank Taras for showing up and just giving us a great overview on the present situation. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Give him a round of applause.